Taco Palenque fans, we have something special for you. Try the Casero Taco now for only $2.75 Monday through Thursday. Flavor packed with premium sirloin rice and refried beans. Only at Taco Palenque. At participating locations for limited time, not valid for delivery. Other restrictions may apply.
From a highly secure network of top secret locations across South Texas, this is the Spurs Insider. I am Mike Finger, joined as always by our Express News panel of beat writer Jeff McDonald, beat writer Tom Orsborn, and sports editor Nick Talbot. We have a whole season to look back on, a whole offseason to look forward to. This is the first offseason edition of the Spurs Insider in the 2024 offseason. And last week, we were concerned about the missing Tom Orsborn, thinking it had something to do with the eclipse. But it turns out it was something far, far, far more serious, more somber, more concerning. Tom, how are you feeling after missing the culmination of a magical season at the Frost Bank Center with COVID?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Thank you. Let's see. I missed that podcast due to travel, I believe. Road.
Yeah, we thought it was the eclipse, but we weren't sure.
But yeah, I missed the last two games. Finally came down with COVID. It's been a long time. Very grateful that I'm vaxxed and boosted several times over. But yeah, just came down with COVID. I started feeling sick in Oklahoma City, to which Bill Land told me later, gosh, I didn't know that horrible game got to you so much. But I'm on the mend now. But like so many of the Spurs finished the season, out of action. But man, what a finish. What a finish. I can't think of a season, be hard pressed for any of us to find a 22-60 season that ended with so much joy. You guys were there. Tell me about it.
Go ahead, Jeff. He talked about joy and he talked about how great it was. Now Jeff can bring us all down. Go ahead.
Well, no, I just want to go back because, like you said, our last podcast, we were worried Tom was going to be raptured during the eclipse and we were never going to see him again. And so I started to worry for a little while that he had actually been raptured. Not worried that he'd been raptured, but that I had missed it.
Yeah.
That's not a bad thought, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, bring us down.
I mean, it was a great way to end the season. What do you want me to say? It's a great way to end the season. If you're going to have an awful season, you might as well win 7 of your last 11, right? Okay. I can bring us down a little bit, or the possibility of it. Is there something I want? How do we evaluate April basketball when it comes to a team like this? Because there are some people that are very excited that the Spurs won 7 their final 11 games. Probably a lot of them in the Spurs building, and they're like, "Hey, it sucks. The season's over. Like, I wish there were more games. We finally got it figured out." Do we think they finally got it figured out, or how do we evaluate this sort of stuff at this time of year?
Well, that Denver game, I mean, gosh, Denver had everything to play for, and Spurs almost beat Denver up there. That was a foreshadowing of what happened in the next to last game. But I mean, that was a memorable moment for these young Spurs.
To answer your question, no, they didn't have anything figured out. No, it doesn't mean that much in the grand scheme of things. And if you put too much stock into winning 7 of the last 11 and thinking that that means this is the core, this is what we build around, this is what we bring back to run it back, that would be a mistake. I'll bring everyone down.
No, absolutely.
April basketball is not indicative of where this team is rebuilding wise. Like it's better to finish that way than not. Draft positioning notwithstanding, in a draft like this, I'll say that in a draft like this where there's not a huge difference maker at the top, not sure there's going to be a big gap between pick number 7 and pick number 1. There's a good chance that pick number 7 might end up having a better NBA career than pick number 1. Like I totally get why they didn't tank. as Pop mentioned after the game on Sunday, tanking really isn't in that team or that organization's DNA. So you might as well try to win when there's not a huge draft difference. But Jeff and I talked to Brian Wright. I'm sorry, Tom missed out on that on Sunday. But as Brian explained, it's not necessarily a run it back situation. It's you take all the information that you've gathered over the past 6 months. You take all the information available to you for the coming 6 months and coming 6 years even, and try to put that all together and figure out where you are. But I don't think that that was a team that should be expected to win 7 out of every 11 games moving forward. I think that in the NBA in April, even with Denver having something to play for, as Tom said, it's just not it's not indicative of where these teams are overall.
The Spurs went 500 last April too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They just seem to do this. And
man, I thought COVID was bad. I'm leaving this terribly depressed. Man.
No, the point is that you do not overreact to a small sample. You do not think that you've got problems solved. You do not say just because. Here's the other thing: the players who were responsible for a lot of this are not core pieces, and we mentioned this. We mentioned this in the last podcast. When Tom was behind the moon. Go ahead.
These are great points, but can't you enjoy what happened against Denver? Man,
I can't enjoy
my job. It's not my job to enjoy wins or losses. I'm impartial.
Come on.
7. So we said they won 7 of their final 11. 4 of them came without their scores number 2, 3, and 4 available. No Jeremy, no Devin, no Keldon. So if you want to read stuff into anything, like it's hard to know what to make of any of that. And you know, your stars were Sandro and Julian Champagny for the second year in a row, finished the season on a tear of sorts. Like those are just maybe they're just April basketball players. I mean, those are guys that can be on your team, but they're not your core going forward. And you have to figure out a way to make it work with the core.
Yep.
But that Denver game was fun. It really was fun.
Yeah,
fun to watch. One at the buzzer. All right. We could talk about that too, because there was something that happened at the buzzer right after the buzzer that struck me. Was, Devontae Graham makes the game-winning shot in that Denver game. And, of course, the crowd is going crazy. But also you pan to the bench and you've got some of those guys we just talked about that were in street clothes. Devin Vassell and Keldon Johnson had no part in this win, but they are jumping up and down and hugging each other like, they just heard their names called on The Price is Right or something. Like it was crazy how bonkers they went. And I just thought that, I don't know, just said something about the team and the vibe of the team. And the fact that these guys are all still pulling the same direction and pulling for each other and still engaged with each other after a season that could have been really miserable. It could have made a lot of people miserable. And I don't want to get all Pollyanna about it, but that's something that that really struck me. And, I don't want to sound whatever, but it is the one thing that people say about Pop that totally rings true from season 1 to now. I guess he's going into season 29 is the people person aspect and the development of a culture. And, we've heard Pop say it a million times. When you have players that like each other off the court and get to know each other off the court, they're more likely to play for each other on the court. And I think that approach to things really made this a season where everybody was on the same page. It could have fractured it a million times. And you look at some of the other teams coming out, like Detroit, everyone involved with that Detroit team seemed miserable. Portland seemed miserable. Charlotte seemed miserable. The Spurs, like, they're happy for each other, even despite, a season that went not as well as they'd expected. And I think Pop deserves some credit for that. I think people could argue the Spurs could go get a more inventive X's and O's coach. I'm not really smart enough to be able to argue for or against you. You can say some of the lineup configurations, especially to start the year, were a little wacky. I can't argue against you there. But the thing that Pop has had from the beginning, and still his best skill as an NBA coach, is the way he handles people. And I think you saw that throughout the season, and then an example of it about just how happy everyone was after that Denver game. Even the players that had no involvement in it, they were out and sidelined.
That's a well thought out argument.
Thank you.
Who can't enjoy? Okay, put the objectivity hat away just for a second. Devontae Graham scoring the game-winning basket. Who can't enjoy that? That guy was, he was nowhere to be found at the end of the bench all season. Was a good soldier, came through at the end. I mean, that was a fun moment.
I think you're right. That's the Devontae Graham answer to every question. You notice that, Tom?
Oh, yeah. Still waiting for my shoes, Devontae. But
Devontae Graham, how do you feel about hitting the game-winning shot? I think it was great.
Yeah,
love Devontae, and I think a big part of what that celebration was between Devin and Keldon. It was a couple of things. Jeff just spelled out beautifully, eloquently, how it has to do with the culture. I can't believe I just used. That's one of my least.
I know.
Favorite
I hate it too.
Words.
I hate it too. It seems so schmaltzy, but I think it actually applies here.
I immediately regret using that word.
I agree.
The atmosphere around the Pop team. I think Jeff explained that well. I think it has to do with a sports column I wrote in the newspaper last week.
Not a Metro column.
A sports column, not a Metro column. About how young Victor Wembanyama, who we haven't mentioned the name of yet, like more than 10 minutes into this podcast.
What a third quarter.
Which might be a record. I think that Victor Wembanyama played a huge role in preserving joy around this team all year. Like there was always something to be excited about. It was not just his exploits on the court, but just kind of the way he is. Like, how can you not sort of be happy around Victor Wembanyama? I think that trickled throughout the locker room, throughout the Frost Bank Center, throughout the city. Everyone who watched and covered and just occasionally saw this team recognized that this wasn't the typical 22-60 team. I think Victor played a huge role in that. And the other thing about Keldon Johnson and Devin Vassell embracing after that game-winning shot against Denver is people just really like Devontae. And I think they were a big part of that hug was they were happy for the Spurs, but they were also just happy for a good guy in the locker room. The elder statesman in the locker room at age 29 to have a moment like that. I thought that was cool. And that speaks to the importance of having those types of guys, even on the youngest teams. And I don't think Devontae Graham will be back next year. Like probably not. His deal is non-guaranteed, like several others. But you need Devontae Grahams in the locker room, guys like that. And hopefully next year, for the Spurs' sake, the Devontae Graham types will play more and will contribute more on the court. But even a team that's this young and has this age 20, age 21, age 22 nucleus like the Spurs do, you need some vet guys that everybody can kind of get behind. And I think all of those factors played into the undeniably good vibes at the end of this season.
I think Devontae might be back.
He might be.
I'm not sure that that's the best thing for Devontae Graham. Like, I think if you cornered him, he would rather go somewhere that would play him.
I'd bet against it, honestly, but I'm not completely ruling it out.
It depends. You only waive him if you need the cap space. That's all.
Right.
Otherwise you keep him on your roster as a $12 million player, and you can trade him as a $12 million player next season. If you just waive him to save money and don't use the cap space on anything, it doesn't make sense.
We'll get into that a little bit.
But that's where I'm sidetracking it. Sorry,
Tom. No, that's probably an okay transition. But Tom had mentioned, what about Sandro Mamukelashvili, a true star in the league today, And we had joked with
how are the Spurs going to build around Mamu?
We had joked with GM Brian Wright on Sunday when he walked in to kind of do his update with some of the beat guys for the season. I told him that we'd gotten together before he walked in the room and conspired to just ask him Mamu questions. That was going to be the thing. How are you going to build around Mamu? What are you going to target in the draft to play with Mamu? The free agency, like what kind of players do you need to complement the Sandro Mamukelashvili? He got a big kick out of that. I think.
Why can't you get Victor Wembanyama to pass Mamu the ball?
Exactly. That's probably not the Spurs' focus this season, building around Mamu. But what a fun guy to have around, and a delightful interview as well. He gave perhaps the best quote about Victor Wembanyama's upside that we've seen. Jeff, you can pass that along.
I don't remember. You'll get it right. You do it.
Well, you're the one who wrote it.
Well, yeah, I wrote it 2 days ago. I've written 2,000 words since then.
The sky's not the limit. He's an alien.
There you go. Thanks, Tom.
Seriously, the most asked question that I got from different people throughout the course of the season was, why doesn't Pop play Sandro more? And it wasn't like, no, they're not saying, yeah, he's a budding all-star, he's blah, blah, blah. But when he's in there, he does pretty well, and he plays pretty well with Wemby. Pop seems to love him. How come he doesn't play him more?
It's a legitimate question. I think there are diminishing returns with him to put a wet blanket on this. Like when you see him in spurts, it's like this guy should play all the time. And then there were points the last week or so where sort of there were signs of, okay, this is why Mamu doesn't play more. We also had that conversation approximately 2.5 minutes. I mean, this was a direct quote from me to some of my fellow scribes about Devontae Graham was, oh yeah, we're seeing why Devontae Graham hasn't played more, because he occasionally does some stuff that isn't optimal. And I made that remark like, oh, this is why Devontae Graham doesn't play more. Like 2 minutes later, he hits a game winner. So in every Spur, there are ups and downs. The Devin Vassell's, the Jeremy Sohans, the Keldon Johnsons have their ups and downs. So it's unfair to judge players just by their downside. But I had asked Sandro after, was the Denver game, Jeff, about, have you ever gotten an explanation from coaching staff, from whoever, about why you didn't get more of an opportunity? And I thought his answer was interesting. He said no. And he's one of the most positive guys out there. And it wasn't like a critical way where he was answering it. It was a matter of fact answer. It was like, no, they don't tell me. I just always stay ready. And I think he might have said something like, that's not my place to ask for explanations. Like, he's just there to do his job, to do what he's told to do. He's not the type that's going to go in and say, knock on Pop's office door and say, I need to know why I'm not getting more minutes. He just kind of was ready to play. And he's restricted, which means if somebody else wants to offer him a contract, the Spurs can match it. A lot of times the Spurs let Sandro Mamukelashvili type players take those offers and move on. But I wouldn't be shocked to see him back either.
Yeah, I think they'll bring him back unless you get some crazy offer.
Yeah.
From somewhere else. So, a lot of times with these guys too, it's like it's the backup quarterback syndrome with fans. Yeah. Like the guys you see very little of that look good in that very little small stretch, you fall in love with. If you watched, pick a name, Devin Vassell play 30 minutes a night for 2 months, you're going to see things you just like he's going to make mistakes. He's going to have bad games. He's going to have really bad games. He's going to have some good games too. But in these small sample sizes, sometimes it's also expectations too. You expect less out of a guy like Mamu than a Devin Vassell. So when a guy like Mamu comes in and gives you these little jolts of things, it's just kind of fun. I think fans gravitate towards that. But I don't necessarily think he's a much better basketball player than the guys that were playing ahead of him.
He provided one of my favorite non-Wemby highlights of the year, and that at the end of that Denver game when he came soaring in for an offensive rebound. And you hardly ever see this play in the NBA or elsewhere. He got the offensive rebound, and on his way down, rather than try to put it back, he touch passed it over to the 7'4" guy, which seems to be a pretty good idea. And they got a bucket that way.
Well, the entirety of that play was somebody missed a shot, and Mamu tried to tap and missed the tap, and Wemby tried to tap that one back. And so what Mamu grabbed the second time was the Wemby's tap. And usually what happens when you get in that situation, people just start tapping it back and forth.
Yeah.
And it was just sort of a smart play to like, we're not going to do that again. Yeah. We're just going to touch pass it over to it's almost like everybody on the floor was expecting him to tap it back. So they weren't even really paying attention to the other 7'4" guy. It was a really smart play.
The other 7'4" guy?
Yeah. What did he end up in that third quarter? 17 points against Denver? That 7'4" guy?
Yeah. In 3 minutes. 7.
My gosh. I mean, it's so crazy that the guy is so damn good that kind of stuff, we don't talk about it enough. And I'm not saying that we have to talk about it that much, but it's incredible what he does.
We need another parental advisory warning. Like these just foul mouthed beat writers that keep
3 out of the last 4 weeks. And
Yes. No, Wemby's amazing.
Oh my gosh, he's amazing.
We've got a whole list of things to get. We'll go overtime this week because let's do the Wemby thing. He exceeded every expectation this year by a long shot. Maybe not his. He says that he didn't feel like he exceeded any expectations, but he clearly exceeded everybody else's, even the people who were responsible for just the ludicrous, absurd amounts of hype about him. Like he surpassed that. Moving forward with a guy like that, who's already, whether he wins the award or not, the best defensive player in the NBA, whether he wins these awards or not, he's one of the top 15 overall players in the NBA. He's an all NBA level player right now at age 20. The Spurs feel comfortable, like every team who drafts a player, that you're going to have him for 6 years. He's going to sign the first extension, which I think goes through year 7. But like players don't generally demand trades or look to get out until year 6. So there is time, but there's also the dynamic of let's not waste any more Wemby time. So this leads us into the offseason. And I will start with Jeff. Just you're Brian Wright, you're R.C. Buford, you're Greg Popovich. Like, what is your approach for this offseason, knowing that you want to do more with this special, just undeniably spectacular 20-year-old player?
It's hard to say that, it's hard to feel sorry for the guys that have Victor Wembanyama on their team to build around. But I do see how it's difficult to know when to pull the trigger on that one big move that's going to take you to the next stage. You've accumulated all this draft capital for a reason. You've accumulated all this cap space for a reason, but when do you use it? And it's a mistake to go too early, and it's a mistake to wait too long. And to find that sweet spot is going to be the trick. And the Spurs have never really been in this situation before, if you think about it, having to figure out how to bring in guys from outside to build around your centerpiece. It was always Tim, Tony, and Manu together, really, from 2003 on. Like, you had that core already in place, and it was just about filling in the margins. You didn't have to go find that second star somewhere when you had those three.
And before that, you already had David and Sean.
Yeah, and they never had cap space to work with or this kind of draft capital either. Like, there was just they were who they were for 20-something years. So
there are cautionary tales out there. One of them being the Dallas Mavericks, who I think, even though they're competitive again, might make a run this year. Like, that they're in decent position. they they took a step back. They had to regroup because they went too early trying to get Luka a co-star.
Yeah,
like the Porzingis trade hurt them.
They've cycled through so many of those guys trying to find Luka a co-star.
And if they had to do it over again, they wouldn't have pushed all their chips into the Porzingis thing right away. And they're still okay. Like Luka is amazing and an MVP candidate, and the Mavericks, if not, they're not the favorite in the West this postseason, but it wouldn't shock anyone if they made a run. Like it's not like doing the big deal early just kills you forever. But if they had to do it over again, they probably wouldn't have done it that way. And so the other factor at play is, do you go for the superstar running mate sidekick after a year in which you went 22-60, or do you think maybe it might be a better move to make moderate improvements, get to 35 and 47 or whatever, get to the play-in level next year, and then you're in a better position to go get a really elite type co-star that can take you to contending for championships. Like the timing is really important here. And I don't have the answer, just like I think Jeff doesn't, just like Tom doesn't, just like Nick doesn't, but it's more complicated than I think some people realize, and you don't want to make a mistake.
Right.
And I guess at this point, if you're talking about this summer, the one everyone's talking about is Trae Young. Like I haven't heard a bunch of other names that are going to be available or possibly available. So do you push all your chips to the center of the table right now for Trae Young? And what does
My answer is an unequivocal no.
I agree.
And I think that's the Spurs answer too.
Yeah. So to answer your question earlier, I think what you're going to see this summer is they're going to try to do well with their draft pick or draft picks, because they still might get Toronto's. I think in free agency, they look to upgrade, look for upgrades, but I don't think they're going to be star level upgrades. Maybe just more role player types. Obviously, they're going to look for more shooting. It was an odd season in that the team set a club record, Spurs record for most threes in a season. It was a pretty poor percentage, and even then, it wasn't a lot of threes relative to the rest of the league. Like they need more shooting around Wemby, so I think they'll go out to look for that. Poor Trey Jones, seems like they're always trying to replace, upgrade at point guard, but he did show a lot this year. I'll need to say that, but I think they'll always be in the market for a bigger point guard. And so I think they'll between the draft and free agency, they'll look in those areas. But I don't think you're looking for I don't think this is the big swing summer. That's just my gut feeling on it.
And I read today in the San Antonio Express News quote from Brian Wright. He said, "Be aggressive, but be strategically aggressive." Is that not a signal that, as also I read in that story, they likely will build around the fringes. So kind of matches what Brian said.
The funny thing about the strategically aggressive quote that Brian said, which I maybe should have got this part in there too, is he says they do that every summer.
Yeah, that's the caveat there. That's when the Spurs fans hear Brian Wright say, we're going to be strategically aggressive. They're like, yes, we're excited about that. Strategically aggressive. And then he follows it up by saying, we've always been strategically aggressive. And then Spurs fans say, oh no.
I didn't read that in the Express News.
I think his point is that we can clarify is that a lot of times teams are aggressive behind the scenes, but it doesn't work out. The trade doesn't happen. The signing doesn't happen, but they were aggressive. They went after it. It just didn't happen. What's the quote he said?
I promise you this.
Promise you this.
We made more than one call at the trade deadline.
We only made one trade at the trade deadline this year, but I promise you this, we made more than one call. And that sort of, I guess that gives you a window into the thinking. Like they're going to cast a wide net, but just because they cast a wide net doesn't mean they're going to come back with anything that makes sense.
Again, we've mentioned this before, but so much of this has to do with being ready when the next Kawhi Leonard fallout happens. And those are the ones that are sort of unpredictable.
And you don't mean Kawhi Leonard himself, but Kawhi Leonard's style fallout was
right.
Sort of
when the Toronto Raptors were ready in 2019, they had sort of run into the wall where they had a really nice team with Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan, a team that had a lot of success, but needed that extra star to put them over the top. And it's not something that they had been planning for years in advance. They were just sort of ready with the right capital to pounce upon the situation when Kawhi Leonard demanded his way out of San Antonio. The Raptors took advantage of that and have a championship to show for it. And it seems like there are lots of those, especially over the past decade. They happen every year, whether it's Kevin Durant. He wants out of Brooklyn. He wants out of Golden State. He could want out of Phoenix at some point. I'm not saying Kevin Durant's the next guy, but James Harden does it every year. There's who knows when these younger type stars will do that.
I
something
think
to monitor, like maybe Cleveland's in the playoffs this year. Cleveland has had a nice season. Maybe they make a run, but if they don't, is a Darius Garland available? Darius Garland sort of fits what the Spurs do. That wouldn't. He's not the elite level guy, but if you could get anybody at that level for not full price, which is what the Raptors got Kawhi Leonard for. They didn't pay full price for Kawhi Leonard. Those are the situations you take advantage of.
And I think I'd point out it doesn't necessarily have to be a super duper star.
Correct.
And maybe it's better if it's not like that. Those situations seem to work out less often. How many places has James Harden been where he's the next piece and it doesn't work out? And in fact, it ends in disaster. And still Kyrie Irving at this point, he made Dallas better, but they aren't is he there? Does he get them to the title? I don't know. We'll find that out. But if you look at Denver,
why Darius Garland kind of makes sense. He's on the timeline. He's younger. You could
what was
pounce
the big
on
trade
something like that and sort of build with those guys. But go ahead.
What was the big trade that the Denver Nuggets made during this era to get them to championship caliber level? They drafted Jokic. That's their centerpiece. They drafted Jamal Murray, who's their number 2. And they trade for Aaron Gordon, who's not an all-star. Maybe he made an all-star team in Orlando. I could fact check that, but he's not a guy you think of as a perennial all-star.
Yep.
But he's a very good piece to that puzzle that kind of made a lot of that stuff click. And so maybe you're looking at that level of guy when you get to that point.
Yep. And some of it has to do with what you're seeking has to do with what you add this summer aside from trades. This draft isn't great, but there are some. Jeff mentioned earlier that the Spurs would like bigger point guards, lead point guards. There are some of those type of guys in the top 10. None of them are automatic, but the Topic kid from Europe, a couple of Kentucky guards, Stillingham and Shepard. Even down to the USC kid who's Collier, whose draft stock has fallen, but maybe you get lucky with one of those point guards. You pick the right one, and then your need becomes not necessarily the point guard, but the wing or the power forward or something along those lines like that. That's why Brian Wright was saying on Sunday that you don't write down your plan step by step on a piece of paper, because that becomes static. You kind of have to have the ability to adapt. There's multiple plans. There's multiple ways this can unfold. And to look at it in the draft in 2024, we're going to pick a point guard. And then in free agency in 2024, we're going to sign a small forward. And then in the summer of 2025, we're going to trade for an all-star. You don't limit yourself in boxes like that. You have to evolve. And I think that is what the Spurs have done really well in building this, is they've given themselves options, giving themselves options.
And you mentioned, this is not a strong draft class, considered a strong draft class, 2024. Next season, next summer, 2025 is expected to be pretty pretty good, pretty stacked. The Spurs could have as many as 4 first-round picks in that draft.
I think they could have 5, but the Charlotte one's not going to come.
No, well, yeah, I wasn't counting Charlotte, but they've got their own. They've got Atlanta's that's unprotected. They've got the Bulls that is protected 1 through 10. And then if the Toronto pick from this year does not convey this year, they have a shot at it again next year. So 4 first-round picks in a pretty deep draft.
And if Charlotte makes the playoffs, it's 5.
By the way,
that's not going to happen.
By the way, they also have 3 second-round picks in that draft. They could be picking 7 players in that draft, which I don't think will happen. Some of that will get traded, but they have a lot of darts to throw in 2025. And so that's worth looking forward to as well.
Yep. Well, it should be interesting this offseason. I think there's going to be a trade. There's going to be a couple of free agent signings. There's going to be some draft picks. We'll be around to chronicle.
How do you know all this?
I'm
like a crystal ball or something?
I think so. Yeah. Those are the scoops. There's going to be a trade. There's going to be free agent signings, and there's going to be draft picks. I'm going out on a limb, but I think that's going to happen.
You think they'll fill the summer league team, Mike? You think that's going to happen too? Yeah.
I think they'll field the summer league team. Okay. And I think that I've been on pretty good authority that they're going to play in 2 summer leagues. I have a strong suspicion they're going to play in Sacramento again. And they're like every other team, they're going to be in Vegas.
Going well, and Spurs are targeting Sacramento for their.
The Spurs are targeting Sacramento for their first summer league team. I think you can probably take that to the bank if you live in Northern California. If you're one of our many worldwide listeners who live up there, you can go see your Spurs in Sacramento during that.
I don't think league. Victor will be playing in that one.
That was going to be my other scoop. You just stole it from me. That I have a strong suspicion that Victor Wembanyama will not play in the Sacramento Summer League or the Las Vegas Summer League.
What if they made him play? That would be so great. That'd be so much fun.
Another scoop is I think we might see Victor Wembanyama out in public in Paris in August, in Lille, France, in late July. Like I think there's a good chance that'll happen, and he's going to be up against one of the most stacked basketball teams since like 1992.
Yeah,
the Team USA is ridiculous.
Yeah,
it was just announced, but
I think Victor got him out of the woodwork.
I think he did. I think Paris did too.
Anyway, right.
We're going to just programming note. We're going to take next week off, and we are going to guarantee this offseason that we will visit your earbuds, your digital players, at least every 2 weeks. We're not going to make a guarantee beyond that, but we will for sure see you at the end of I guess that it'll hit your earbuds. The next one will hit your earbuds on May the 1st, and we'll continue on the Wednesday schedules. If news events dictate, we'll hear you, or we'll be with you more often. But Tom and Jeff, they work so hard. They need a little time off. They've been through a lot. Tom's still recovering his immune system. Jeff he just works so hard. It's an inspiration. You just see him so dedicated to his craft, his job. Like Jeff, you need some time, don't you?
Oh, what? I wasn't listening.
Yeah. Anyway, we will talk to you in May. And until then, take care of each other. Keep it real.